pornography. And so it's going to be an ongoing theme or feature, if you will, covering different elements or aspects of this conversation. And I think we should be having more of these conversations as opposed to shying away. It is a challenge. It is something that is 100% affecting our communities. And definitely need to have these conversations, especially in the churches. And today in particular, we are, of course, talking about hope for users. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Ian.
Really good to join you guys again. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, we look forward to it as well. Once again, a much needed conversation, I think, especially because it's not been spoken about as often as it should be, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think particularly as Christians and as the church, we find this a tricky topic, don't we? But like so many things in life that are tricky, doesn't mean it isn't vitally important.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into it, are you well? Are you having a good Tuesday?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks. Yeah, it's been a busy day for me. So it's 3:00 here in the UK where I am. So I'm coming to the end of my day, but I think you guys are even ahead of me, right? Is it what? It's 5:00 with you. So there
20
you go.
past 5, yeah.
Yeah, people are driving home, having a long day after a long day at work, something like that. I've still got a couple more hours to do.
Yeah,
we experienced very warm weathers as well on this end, and yeah, it's been a hot day out here in Cape Town, South Africa, but nonetheless, very busy day as well out here with the CCFM family. And yes, we're going to be diving straight rather into this conversation that we need to have.
Again, I just want to encourage you, family, please do exercise discretion. If the kids are around, perhaps just ask them to move away from the radio. If they're old enough to understand the conversation, then they can stay. And of course, inviting you to interact, opening up the WhatsApp lines 061 798 1075. Now, jumping straight into it, I know that there are quite a number of I want to say shocking statistics, Ian, just before we dive into the first question. Chat to us about the stats around Christians who view or practice pornography. What do those look like?
Yeah, I mean, it can be easy for us sometimes to think that perhaps this is just something that's happening in our communities, but not necessarily in our congregations. But in a recent report by a group called Barna that do a lot of surveys and studies and reports within the church, they released a report last year talking about this topic with churches and Christians. And from that report, we learned that 22% of practicing Christians viewed pornography weekly, and 7% said that they viewed it daily. And out of that, we know that 75% of Christian men and 40% of Christian women admit to watching pornography occasionally. And I find that an interesting one because perhaps 40% sounds quite a lot for people. They think of it maybe as something that men are more struggling with and less so women. But what we're starting to see, I think, here, even in this report, is that that's changing, that it can be men and women, and that it's not just an occasional thing. Like I say, that 7% of people saying they're watching porn daily suggests that this is something that people are struggling with today, right now, at the moment.
Now, just talking about struggling, and perhaps someone is listening right now and they're struggling with the addiction of pornography. What would you say, is the first step that they could take to begin their own journey toward freedom, whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's perhaps a little bit of a cliche, but I think admitting you need help is often the first step. We talk about this idea of we have to get real if we want to get rid. If people want to get rid of this problem in their lives, then you have to be honest. You have to get real. You have to be honest with yourself that this is something that I'm struggling with. Stop kind of minimizing it. Stop making it smaller, trying to convince yourself it's not a problem. And obviously we need to get really honest with God and often with others as well. One of the main ways beyond that initial kind of honesty about this is a problem, this might be something that I need to think about and deal with, is to begin to get honest and real about why we use pornography, because that's not as obvious as it sounds. Sometimes people think, oh, okay, we all know why people use pornography, but actually what we find in our work, and we work with hundreds of individuals every year who are trying to see change in their life, that very often actually the reasons that they're using pornography are varied. It might be actually that they're using pornography to try and escape stress and anxiety or isolation or loneliness, that often it can be an emotional thing that is the trigger for their porn use. It's something that actually they are, trying to self-soothe with. They're trying to make themselves feel a little bit better. And porn is the thing that they turn to. Perhaps listeners, you're listening to this, and if you had a difficult day at work or at home, maybe you're going to go and reach out for a bar of chocolate or something to just try and feel a little bit better at the end of the day. If you struggle with porn, often that's the thing that people do. It's not necessarily to do with sex. It can often be to do with stress or anxiety. And so one of the things we would talk about as a first step would be, begin to figure your trigger. Begin to be honest about when you are vulnerable, when you are turning to porn. The Bible talks about guarding our hearts, doesn't it, in Proverbs 4? And one of the things that a bodyguard would do for, maybe an important VIP is they would figure out when is this VIP that I'm guarding? When are they vulnerable? When is it when we're walking outside? Okay, we need to make sure that we've got all the angles covered. Or is it at certain times or places? And so in similar way, our hearts can have certain times and places when they're vulnerable. So working out, what are the emotions that make us vulnerable? Maybe it's when we're on our own and we're stressed, but also, are there environments, are there times of day, are there places when we're more vulnerable? And that's a process of reflecting, being honest with ourselves, saying to ourselves, when I last used porn, what led up to that? What was the emotion or the environment that led towards that decision to use porn? And so being honest about that, getting real so that we can get rid, figuring our trigger, they're all important first steps.
Ian, you touched on such a interesting analogy there, making an example of some of us would grab a chocolate bar in the same way. That would be the same instance if a listener, would grab their phone, a device that they would use to feel maybe to release tension or whatever the case might be. Then what other ways, you touched on the first step, figure the trigger, which is something we can remember. What other steps can we take in terms of, or what other steps are available in faith to help someone or help a listener who's listening right now, overcome that struggle or overcome that addiction of pornography?
I think one of the important things to remember, and again, I think this is utterly biblical. I mentioned before Proverbs 4, where it talks about guarding our hearts. Well, the next part of that proverb is it says this. It kind of says two things actually. One thing it says is avoid corrupt talk, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And it also says mark your path out. And I think both of those things in Proverbs give us some hints at what our next steps could be beyond that first step. The first one is this idea of marking your path. In other words, have a plan. Don't just kind of hope that you're going to not look at porn this week or this evening. Actually have a plan for it. I remember hearing once about Samson and where it talked about when Samson went and visited a prostitute in the enemy territory, and it was he had to walk something like 20 miles or something like that to actually go and visit her. And here's the thing: sometimes we can think, well, this just kind of happened. I didn't mean to do this. It just kind of happened. But actually, for Samson, he had to walk every single step, tens of thousands of steps before he made that regrettable decision. And actually, often our mistakes, our sin, our kind of decisions that we regret often have a path that lead to them. But actually, so do our successes and so do our freedom. That actually the right choices often have a path and a plan that we need to take. And what I mean by that is, we need to kind of know what we're going to do. So if we've figured our trigger, if we've figured out that, you know what, when I use porn is when I'm on my own late at night. So what's my plan going to be? Well, my plan might be that I don't take my phone into my bedroom at night, or my plan might be I always go to bed at the same time as my spouse, so I'm not left alone downstairs with the TV on. Or my plan might be that I'm gonna, if I'm feeling stressed out, I'm gonna have something that I can do that is healthy and to try and deal with that stress. Actually having intentionality, I think, is a really important thing, and forming a plan. The other thing I mentioned, didn't I, was about avoiding corrupt talk. And I think that's another element for us to kind of be really aware of. I don't know about you, but I think often the sales team that we have within ourselves is often the most persuasive sales team. It's often my own self-talk that gets me into trouble, right? I'm really good at convincing myself why, if I do this thing, it's just going to make me feel so much better. I'm really good at convincing myself that actually, like when you meet a salesman or even just in a coffee shop and they're trying to convince you to put cream on that hot chocolate or marshmallows or whatever, they're always really good at kind of convincing you of how great it's going to be. And often they don't mention the cost, right? It's like, do you want cream with that? They won't tell you that it's an extra 50, whatever, rand or whatever. They'll just say, do you want that? Sure, of course you want that. And actually, I think our hearts are pretty good at doing that too. We're often really good at convincing ourselves that this is the only thing that's going to make me feel better, or I deserve this, or I need this to get through the day. And we're good at convincing ourselves why this is something we need. We're not always very honest about the implications or the consequences. So we maximize the kind of the implication that it's going to have on us, but we minimize the consequences of it. And so that's that kind of sales talk, that self-talk, where we justify something or we begin to rationalize something or minimize something. That's the kind of corrupt talk that I think Proverbs is suggesting we need to avoid and recognize. Once I start catching myself thinking like that, talking to myself in that way, convincing myself that I deserve this or I should do this, that's when actually I need to then go, oh my goodness, okay, I need to use my plan. And for me, often my plan is accountability, talking to someone. Go when I catch myself thinking like that, actually saying, right, I need to be texting someone. Often when we talk about accountability within the church, we think of it's what you do after you've made a mistake. You fess up after you mess up. If I've made a mistake, I need to be telling someone about it. I need to ring my pastor, my small group leader, and tell them I've made a mistake, whatever that mistake might be in life. But the best time to be accountable, the best time to reach out to your pastor, that person you've given permission to speak into your life, whoever that is, not after you make the mistake, but before you do, when you're actually entertaining the idea, when you're catching the fact that maybe you've been triggered, if you're having that bad day, you've started to tell yourself, oh, you know what I need to do tonight? I need to get home and I just need to kind of maybe go on some websites. Once you start thinking like that, once you start on that path like Samson and you start walking in that direction, you haven't got there yet. You haven't reached the place yet. That's a unique time to send that text to someone and say, I've had a really bad day today. I'm feeling stressed out. I know where this path leads me. I need you to hang out with me tonight. Or I need you to pray for me right now because I know I'm struggling, whatever. So accountability at that point can make a massive, massive difference. Of course, it's really important that we don't hide our mistakes. We don't keep those in the shadows, and having people speak truth to us after we make mistakes and remind us of who we are. That's really important as well. We must talk to people when we actually need to confess sin, but actually before we mess up, that can be a really powerful time to be accountable to others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Intentional plan, accountable relationships, and of course, some practical tools that lead to lasting change. We're chatting to Ian Henderson. You can join us live, of course, on YouTube as well as Facebook. That's CCFM 107.5. I must just emphasize once again, it is a sensitive conversation. And as mentioned, you are advised to exercise discretion. If the kid is around, you can ask them to move or just lower the volume. But if they're old enough to understand, we invite you also to just interact with us. 0617981075.
Ian, I've got one more question on my end, and that is for listeners listening right now. They would love to find out in terms of, just mentioning what Natasha has just mentioned on practical steps that they can take towards their freedom. Maybe any recovery programs that the Naked Truth has, or steps or conventions that they can be involved in and be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as an organization, Naked Truth, we do provide those kind of practical tools for people. We've talked a lot about being able to figure your trigger. We've talked about trying to identify those times, those places, those emotions that make us more vulnerable. We've talked about accountability and having somebody that we can talk to. And actually that process isn't always easy for people. That's not always easy to work out. And so one of the things that we offer are some groups that help people begin that journey of figuring their trigger, to begin to have people they can be honest with and that they can talk to. And so we have a program called Click to Kick. It's an online group. It runs over 8 weeks. It's free of charge. It's conducted through Zoom, but there are people who lead those groups who really know what they're talking about and will help you think through how you can use these tools. But if the idea of joining a group is a little bit scary for you, then we also have other things. So we have something called Control-Alt-Delete, which you can just download from the App Store in your on your mobile, or you can visit nakedtruthproject.com and find access to that. And that's some videos and some exercises that will help you think through these things as well. So there's Click to Kick and Control-Alt-Delete. They're both free. They're both really tools and programs to help you begin to put this intentional plan into place, as well as find a community of people who are going through what you're going through and who understand it and can journey with you as well.
I love that you also mentioned, that community of people who understand exactly, because maybe sometimes our accountability partner, because they don't experience the same type of temptations or patterns that we have, they may not understand us in that manner. But being a part of, a community of people who have gone through it, you connect on a different level than you would with anyone else.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Ian, thank you so much for your time. Once again, a very great conversation to have, breaking those barriers and, of course, starting the dialogue. I believe next week we will talk about a church response, which is, once again, a very important element to touch on.
Yeah, great. Look forward to seeing you guys again.
We too. Thank you so much, Ian.
Bless you, Ian.
Bye.
Bye.